Okay, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Um, you know, it I keep on saying I wish this was going to be the last every 2 week session, and every 2 weeks I get surprised or we get surprised by the news. At this point, I'm afraid this is going to be going on for a while. I don't see an end to this war anytime soon, as sadding as, as terrible as that is. Um, we're in a really bad place. The attack on Qatar, um, even if it had succeeded, was an incredible mistake. And the fact that it failed, we got both the no success, which it's killing them all is a good thing. Don't get me wrong; they all deserve to die, but timing is everything, and location is everything, and how you do it is everything. And the way we did it was absurd. You don't send planes and missiles into a country which you have reasonable relations with, you're not at war with. You don't um, you don't do it when there's about to be an answer to the Trump proposal. Now they may have said no, and you could have waited for the excuse for them to say no, and then say, look at these people, they're saying no all the time. Well, at least that might have been a better set of timing, but to do it while they're discussing the potential agreement, which, like I said, in all likelihood they would have rejected, but there was some possibility they'd accept it. And maybe that's the reason he did it. I don't know. You have a situation that's never happened in Israel's history, a double level situation, where the majority of the military leadership was against the strike on Qatar, and the majority of the military and strategic leadership was against the attack on Gaza City. But Netanyahu is doing it anyway, because we do not have a functioning system at the moment in the Israeli government. We've never had a defense minister who wasn't a defense expert, I'll put in quotation marks expert, but in some form or another had his own set of opinions. We have a guy who was considered by many in the cabinet years ago as the not the brightest member of the cabinet. Let me put it that way. A political hack who's there only to make um, Prime Minister Netanyahu happy, goes along with anything that Netanyahu wants, and or trying to create his own mark on the Likud, worried about the Likud primaries, wanting to do high in the Likud primaries, which they're all trying to do, which is a problem in itself. So everyone went along with two plans now, two disastrous plans. One we're going to pay, both of them we're paying for a long time to come. It's the frustration level here is very, very high. The feeling of hopelessness and inability to stop it is overwhelming, to be honest. The sense there's almost nothing we could do to stop this government from doing what it wants. I mean, the cabinet meeting today was devoted to one thing only. The whole cabinet was a discussion how the poor Likud ministers feel threatened when people are demonstrating near their homes, and how they're not doing enough to stop the demonstrations near their houses, and that's what the whole cabinet discussion was about. Um, and that's what was discussed at the cabinet meeting today. Not the fate of the hostages, not the economic situation that we're in right now, not our international relations. I can give you a whole long list of things that were not discussed. No, we discussed the fact that poor Likud ministers feel they're threatened by the demonstrators. Um, it's an absurd situation, especially since the demonstrators, unfortunately, are not being very threatening in any case, which is a whole other story. So we're in the situation where, I've heard in the last 2 days, serious people, former prime ministers and former chiefs of staff, basically saying they're not sure that Netanyahu is all there in making his decisions. The decision to attack Qatar the way he did makes no strategic sense, makes no geopolitical sense. It makes, looks good politically, I guess, on his base. Nothing, I'm afraid of nothing. I will do what no one else will do. I will fight to the end to get rid of terrorism, even though I'm the one who's responsible for October 7th. Oh, wait, I forgot about that. We can't talk about that. No, I didn't do that. That's somebody else. That was the attorney general's fault or someone else's fault. That's what it is constantly. Someone else's fault if anything goes wrong. But okay, we'll leave that part aside. It makes no sense. And I've heard, no one has come up with any logical reason why uh, why we're doing it. No one is thinking why we did it, other than the fact that, yeah, it's good to kill these people, but why now? B, nobody is came up with to this day any reason why 4 weeks ago we went from insisting we wanted a partial deal, and when the partial deal was offered, we went and said, no, 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 we want the full deal, but of course our full deal means Hamas surrender. And no one can explain why that sudden change, other than the fact that, as President Trump was quoted as saying, every time we're close to making a deal, Bibi blows something up, whether figuratively or literally. Um, that's the sense. That's the sense here that he does not want a deal. He does not want to bring this to an end. And there is a lack of understanding as to the impact all of this is happening. It's starting to make its way on, certainly onto the mainstream media, talking about the diplomatic tsunami that's coming our way, talking a little bit now about the economic impact it's beginning to have, and the Israeli companies that are having trouble selling, and the places that Israelis are no longer welcome, and all of those things. But among some set of this population, they don't care. We'll do it all by ourselves. They live under the myth that we can do it all ourselves. We're strong, we're independent, we developed X, Y, and Z in terms of technology. Let's see the world do without our technology. Well, what they forget to mention is that all these technology people can tomorrow morning relocate themselves to Silicon Valley or to other places. They are quite mobile, and they don't tend to um, to agree with what we're doing right now, to be quite honest with you. So it's really more than a little problematic. They live in a completely other world, particularly the right wing of this government, which is the government at this point. There are very, very few of them that have any dealings with the real world. If you look at, one of the, leaving aside the ideology of the settlers in the West Bank and leaving aside some of the political views and whatever else, the fact of the matter is that they have been a cost center. They have given nothing to the Israeli economy in all the years of existence. The settlements in the West Bank cost money. They bring nothing to the GDP of Israel. There's no industry there. There's no high tech there. There's nothing there but people who work for the government. There's a minimum amount of agriculture in a few of these places, but it is absolutely useless from an economic standpoint. You can argue about security, and that's a legitimate argument that we can make, that they help the security, although I think they may hurt the security, but we'll leave that part aside for the moment. From a purely economic standpoint, the settlements are an incredibly net negative in all aspects of Israel right now, right, economically. And the people who live there don't understand that at all. They're not dealing in the real world. They're not businessmen who are trying to close deals. They're not people flying in and out of the country, increasing Israel's exports. Because after all, we are a small country. The reason we are semi-rich at this point, and we are rich, relatively speaking, is because of our export industries, because of our high tech. That's what's made us rich in the last 20 years. We went from being a mid-level country to a member of the OECD and one of the middle wealthy ones. And if we took away the ultra-Orthodox in our economic numbers, would be one of the wealthiest countries in the OECD per capita GNP. But that's it's sort of irrelevant to these people because they don't know any of this, or they don't live any of this. On top of which, they believe that God will take care of it. When you have a strong belief and you're a messianic on top of everything else, you believe that it'll all work out because God will take care of it. Now, the new person who is being nominated to be the head of the Shin Bet um, is a messianic believer in the Messiah and that future direction. And people here are trying to normalize that. Oh, what's wrong with messianism? Lots of religious people are messianic. Well, guess what? This is the very basis of Zionism was a rejection of messianism. The whole idea we're going to wait for the Messiah to come back to Eretz Israel, to go back to Israel, that was what was rejected by Zionism. Zionism said we cannot wait because whether there'll be a Messiah or not, that's an issue of religious belief. But in the meantime, we can't wait. We need to create a state of Israel. We need to build a state. And that's what Zionism is all about, rejection of messianism. And so the idea that there are people who are in our government right now who are making decisions who have messianic beliefs is more than a little frightening. Because when you have messianic beliefs, you're not deciding things based on facts and reality. You're deciding things based on your messianism and your beliefs. And that's really more than a problem. Um, so it's brought us into this really terrible place. This terrible place. We're going into Gaza. We're seeing pictures every day of blowing up buildings in Gaza. Now, there's a military reason to blow up these buildings. If you want to occupy the place, you don't want them to be able to shoot down at you from these buildings. On the other hand, we make this excuse because the Hamas is using these buildings as centers, operation centers. You know what? That's why we have to destroy the buildings. No, we're destroying the buildings for two reasons. One, because it'll make it easier to go in there. It'll be harder to stop our troops if there are no tall buildings. But B, I think someone wants to destroy all of Gaza. That's the reality. And so I don't know. I don't understand what people are thinking. I mean, I understand, all of the anger and everything else was very understandable. We all shared it after October 7th. We are very close to 2 years later. 2 years later, it's long time for rational thinking to take over. I mean, I'm not one of those people who believes, and if people have listened to me and see me write for the last number of years, I don't believe peace is around the corner. I don't believe there's anyone who we can make peace with right now. Peace is in the terms of what peace means. I don't think it's possible in the near term, and maybe even the medium term. But do we want to eliminate any term for making peace with these people? What stories are these children and grandchildren going to tell about the Israelis who destroyed everything, every part of their lives? What stories are they telling? Will they be telling? What stories of the Nakba, what happened in 1948, which was mostly not our fault, a little bit our fault, but mostly not our fault. It was basically the fault of the Palestinians and the Arabs for not accepting the um, the partition plan. Um, this is going to be the Nakba on steroids because not only we've been pushing people in and out and killing many more people than we ever did in 1948, but we're leveling every place there is in Gaza. To what end? To what end? And who's going to come back and build this? And this magical belief that the Palestinians are going to go move somewhere else. First of all, it's a terrible idea for the Jews of the world because wherever Palestinians go, that's where anti-Semitism comes. I don't want to, fueling Islamophobia or whatever else, but that's a reality. Particularly where there are large concentrations of Palestinians, they are still angry at Israel, rightfully, not rightfully, we can discuss that all you want. And they identify Jews with Israel, rightfully or not rightfully, but that's what ends up happening. And so wherever there are Palestinians in the United States and other places, that's where you'll see more anti-Semitism, in Europe particularly, very much so. So what? We want to export anti-Semitism to the rest of the world? The point of the state of Israel was to decrease uh, anti-Semitism. That's the reality. That's what we want to do. We don't want to increase it in the world, but that's what we're going to do by if the Palestinians wanted to leave, if we could convince them to leave. So, to be honest, I don't understand what we're doing. I really don't understand what we're doing. I mean, I shouldn't say I don't understand. I understand why Netanyahu wants to keep the war going because as long as the war is going, he doesn't have to deal with a national commission of inquiry that will find out how much he was responsible for what took place on October 7th. He wants to keep the war going because as long as he does, the further it goes, the further we get from October 7th when it finally ends. And he wants to keep the war going on the chance that we'll have his total victory. It could possibly happen. There could become a point when the Hamas collapses. It's not likely. There are very few military experts that expect it to happen, but it's possible. But how many soldiers' lives is it going to take to do that at this point? To what aim? And again, we are not going to get rid of Palestinian armed resistance anytime in any of our lifetime. And I don't know how the youngest person on this Zoom is, but however old you are, you're younger than me, I'm most likely. In your lifetime, there will continue to be Palestinian armed resistance to us because they hate us. Deserved, not deserved. We can discuss the history about it, etc. That's the reality. And if they once hated us a little, now they hate us even more. And we've done nothing, 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 nothing to decrease that hatred. Again, I am not one of these, wide-eyed liberals who believes, if we just did this and that, we'd have peace. No, the Palestinians have rejected all of our offers over 50 years. Have we had a part in making it worse? Certainly in the last 20 years, we certainly have made it worse. But before that, they could have had a state many times over. They rejected it. They could have turned Gaza into Singapore, and that would have modeled something that would have made it very hard for us not to give them a state in the West Bank to go with Singapore and Gaza. But no, they decided not to do that. They decided to turn it into an armed camp in order to attack Israel. Is it our fault they did that? No, that was their decisions. Despite all of that, despite all of that, what have we done on the other side to try to decrease the hatred in any which way, any small way, anything? You know, even to the smallest, stupidest level, that when American troops headed into Europe, the soldiers all had chocolate with them to give out to kids. I'm not saying that's what we should be doing, but that was a thought, right? There was thinking involved in that. There was someone whose job it was to think, how can we get the population to like us a little bit or hate us a little less? But we're not doing any of that. No one's thinking about that in any which way. Nowhere's. We are trying to feed them as much as we can and to avoid starvation. That's being done. We're not starving them. We're trying to get food into them. But is there any greater thinking about this? Absolutely not. And, again, I don't believe if we would be nicer, we'd bring about peace. Don't get me wrong. It's not a matter of us being nicer to get peace, but we need to think about what's going to be afterwards. And let's remember something else that I've discussed many times over the last 2 years now, practically. I said when we were about to start the ground operations that you don't start a ground operation unless you know how it's going to end and what you want it to be when it ends. And this government has never once had a serious discussion about the day after. Why? Because the government would fall. Because you have members of this government who are committed towards resettling Gaza because they've been obsessed since the pullout in Gaza in 2006 and 7. They've been obsessed with resettlement in Gaza. 2005, sorry. So, you know, there's nothing we can do about that. So we don't have a discussion. So there is no discussion. So the military go back. I think it was the third month of the war. Defense Minister Gallant said there are three options for Gaza. They're bad, bad, and worse. The bad was the PA takes over Gaza. The worse was Israel militarily occupies Gaza. And the worse than that was Hamas stays in Gaza and stays ruling in Gaza. He was in favor of the PA. He said, I don't love the PA, the Palestinian Authority. They're very problematic. There are all sorts of things that they could be better at. But let's work at creating a better PA. Arab countries, let's get the Arab countries to whoever, please mute. Uh, let's get the Arab countries and in the region to change them as much as possible. And they're the best of the worst solutions. I've said this before, I've written it before. One of the biggest problems that people believe is that there's always a good solution. There is often, certainly not when it comes to these sort of things, a good solution. What there are, better of the worst solutions. That's where we're at. Better of the worst solutions, but take the better of the worst solutions. We're taking the worst of all worlds. So we're not ending Hamas because we really can't. Our army has been fighting for way too long. The rules of the Israeli army have always been wars have to be short, they have to be intense, and they have to end relatively quickly because the world won't allow us, our economy won't allow it, our army's not big enough, all sorts of good reasons. And we follow that rule more or less throughout our history, but not in this case, which is the longest war in history. So now we're continuing to fight this war, which we can't really win militarily in that sense. Yes, we can win every battle, but we can't destroy every Hamasnik. Our situation in the world eh, is the worst it's ever been. And there's some people say, "Oh, who cares about the world?" Klum was what they always repeat Ben Gurion's line. But Ben Gurion also was very careful to believe that we need to have allies too, and he made sure we had allies too. At this point, we have very few allies. We have an ally in President Trump, but we're losing even the right wing base in the Republican Party, as far as I can tell. The far right, the youth in the far right are joining with the youth from the far left, and we're losing them too. If we lose the United States, I don't know where we'll stand. And we're losing, much of the rest of the world. We've lost to some extent. And then today, after creating an alliance against Iran, which we did, all the moderate Sunni states, we created an alliance against Iran. Well, guess what's taking place today? Today's the preparatory meeting, and there's going to be the full meeting tomorrow of the leaders of all of the rest of the Arab world. The Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, I believe Turkey is taking part. I think Syria is taking part. All the countries together are getting together in order to discuss ways of coordinating their defense against Israel. So not against Iran, against Israel. Why? Because our government is so overwhelmed with its own power, drunk with power, as one would say, that we did what we did in Qatar, and now we're going to pay the price. And of course, we got nothing from it because it failed. That's a different story. We didn't know in advance it was going to fail. Um, but that's where we stand. So, I'm extremely pessimistic these days. I've been pessimistic for a while, but it's getting more and more frustrating. Frustrating in the sense of, you know, there's not much we can do. It's very hard to do things. And of course, I look in the rest of the world and look in the American side, things look not more optimistic, but that's for a different discussion. Someone asked me here, so before I open up for questions, I'll actually answer a question that was sort of put in the discussion. What do I suggest for the day after? Look, we should have had all along Gallant's worst solution, or least worst solution. I take that back. We should have taken the PA at its offer and let the PA lead a pan-Arab force that would take over Gaza. Yes, the Hamas would still have an influence there, the same way the Hamas still has an influence in the West Bank, and we haven't eliminated Hamas in the West Bank. But the PA would be in the lead. We would make sure that no heavy weapons got into Gaza, that no tunnels were being built, and that no rockets were being created or invaded or brought into. Would it be perfect? No. Does the PA love us? No. Does the PA want a Palestinian state? Yes. But they also don't believe in the armed struggle, and they believe in getting to it politically. Now, some people in Israel consider the political to be more dangerous. That's the problem, maybe. But the reality is that was the best war solution. Can we still do that? Possibly, but it's getting more and more difficult. And we want the Gulf states to come in and rebuild Gaza. But how much did we just cost them in the last week? How many billions of dollars is it going to cost to rebuild what we just destroyed this past week? And, you know, I don't know. I don't know who's going to come up with all this money. And we've made, another, 50,000, 100,000 Gazans homeless this week. To what aim? And someone has to rebuild all of these towers or buildings or whatever it might be. That's not cheap and it doesn't happen quickly. Um, so that's what I believe should it be for the day after. Is it perfect? No. But we have killed almost everybody who was involved in October 7th. Are we going to kill the idea of Hamas? No, we're not going to kill the idea of Hamas. And like I said, we're not going to eliminate. I keep on hearing from people on Facebook or whatever, you can't leave Hamas in power. You can't leave people who hate you. Well, they hate us anyway. And they people in Ramallah and, even closer to the center of the country hate us too. That's not going to change anytime soon. Maybe we could work at changing that. Maybe we could work at changing the educational system, but it's not the educational system alone. I mean, I talk about the nonsense I hear. We need a new educational system in Gaza so they don't hate us so much. Excuse me, if you're a Gazan kid who's 12 and you saw your father blown up, your mother homeless, and God knows what else in the last year and a half, Is there any educational system that's going to get you not to hate us? That's a reality. Now, we can argue whether what we did was justified, and it was not genocide, and it was not a lot of things we're accused of. But if you're the average Gazan kid, how are you going to walk away from this? What are you going to think about us? No education is going to change that. And no one's even thinking about that, to be honest. And so it's very frightening in a short, medium term. And of course, the issue of us being isolated in the world and being limited to, in terms of our trade and high tech and investments dropping and all the things that we're beginning to see. These are very, very, very frightening and very problematic. And they're not going to get any better as we go deeper into Gaza, as more and more pictures come out of more and more civilians are going to die since they're not leaving Gaza City. The 750,000 have stayed, 250,000 have left. And we're going to do a major operation with 750,000 people there? Really? Uh, so, like I said, I am pessimistic. I wish I had some good solutions. I wish I had some positive things to say. I do say listen to the podcast that I put up, I guess last night. There was a positive podcast that talked about um, an Israeli who's has a VC fund only towards Arab Israelis and doing some great things. So I have to say that after I person I had on the podcast is someone I know very, very well and I see all the time. We usually have these pessimistic conversations. I know what he does generally, but after I edited the podcast last night, I said, wow, something good for at least. So if you want some good news, listen to last night's podcast. It is a positive podcast of a little teeny good news going on here. Okay, with 6:30, open up for questions. So people raise your hand, happy to answer them. Um, no questions again, 2 weeks in a row. Let's see if there's anything else in the in the
Sandra, speak up.
go ahead.
Okay. Do you think that the increasing level of Israeli protests will have any effect on changing this government?
No, that's my simple answer. Um, two problems. One is they don't care. That's number one. Number two, it's increasing, but incrementally increasing. In other words, there should have been 1 million people on the streets when the decision was to walk away from the agreement, or when the decision was to go ahead with Gaza. There should have been 1 million people, and our stupid politicians, the opposition people, should have led it and should have said, the Eisenkotts and the Lapids and the Gantzes should have said, we're all laying down in front of the Knesset or in front of Bibi's house or whatever it is. We're all laying down there and we're not moving. But no, they're playing the regular game of politics when the situation is much, much worse. So the answer is no, I don't expect to have any impact on the government. We haven't seen any impact. There was a minor impact during the judicial reform, but that was um, easier done. Let's put it that way. It was to slow something down that I don't think that even Netanyahu really wanted to do. So that was easy, but this, no. Brian,
Yeah, Mark, I put a comment in the chat which relates to something you'd said earlier about um, the settlements and what the videos that was seized from the West Bank of the settlers include videos of completely out of control children. I'm a social worker, right? That's been my career in the United Kingdom, and if that sort of behaviour was displayed by children in the UK, and I'm sure many other countries, there would be a social services and a social work intervention, and those children would be the subject of a lot of scrutiny. But there doesn't seem to be any concern or intervention that addresses the quite high degree of disturbance as all children seem to exhibit and the violence and out of controlness. And I just wondered if there is a concern within Israeli society around those children and the children of those settlers. or whether like the settlers themselves, it would appear as that they're just left to get on with it and be as violent as they want.
Two parts of the answer. First of all, we keep hearing is that they're only a small group. They're the far, they don't represent the settlers, etc. On the other hand, the answer would, well, if they're a small group and they don't represent the settlers, why don't you gain control of them, right? In other words, if this is doing so much harm, but I don't believe they're a small group. I believe they're a larger group, and they're actually doing something useful not in reality, but useful to the settlements. They're scaring the Palestinians. They're trying to push them off some lands. They're creating incidents, and then the settlers can claim that there is violence on the part of the Palestinians. So I think they have a purpose to be had. Not all settlers agree with them, obviously. So I don't know how out of control they are or how much they're being directed, and they seem to be out of control. I don't have that answer. Um, if they were a minority that the settlers didn't want, then they could be brought under control. They should always be taken to a youth camp and put in a youth camp for a year, But none of them have been arrested. Let's be honest here. Almost zero of all the attacks on Palestinians over the last year, 2 years, the number of arrests I can count on, both in my hands, the number of convictions. I don't know if I have a finger for that. I don't know if there have been any convictions. So this is clearly, I don't know if I say planned, but certainly accepted. So, um, I don't know.
Can I respond to that just a bit? It's just that the children do seem it's not about the adults. And I know you kind of addressed it in part, but I'm sure that there are very good psychiatric services within Israel, as there are always inadequate in every country. However, that from my view, we're talking about really quite disturbed children who are growing up in a disturbed environment and nothing's being done. It's not about whether is Israel defending itself with disturbed children? Seems to be an issue that one ought to be concerned about if one isn't.
Um, so two things. First of all, just we have good psychologists. We don't have nearly enough. Let's put it that way. Right now, we have an incredible shortage of psychologists. Um, the army released a figure that there are 20,000 people kids wounded veterans, half of them with PTSD, and the ratio is 1 to 150 people to deal with them. So we don't have enough psychologists. So, if you're a psychological social worker, we need you right now because we need lots of people in this country to deal with just the soldiers, not to mention the whole population that have been traumatized over the last 2 years, which is the fact. All of us have some version of PTSD, greater or lesser extent, depending on how close rockets landed and everything else over the last year. So yes, these people need to be dealt with, but no one wants to. Maybe they serve a purpose to some people, and that's what's really frightening among everything else. Um, Look, we are a society heading in the wrong direction at the moment, and I don't have any good answers. I don't have any, you know, look, our enemies are terrible. Hamas is a terror organization that should cease to exist. And as I've written before, everything that I've read about them, and I've seen it during my lifetime. But as you all know, I'm on the final stages, hopefully, of finishing a book over these last 30 years. And Hamas has been responsible more than anything else for the fact that there is no peace between us and the Palestinians, consistently blowing people up whenever there was any sign of progress in terms of peace. So I have no I wish they would all disappear. I wish we could, use our space lasers to get rid of all of them, so to speak. But as we know, we don't have space lasers, despite what certain American politicians think, but leave that part aside. Um, so we're really stuck at the moment. And we're really stuck with these terrible people on one hand, without a clear policy, and we're doing exactly what Hamas wants. We're destroying our position in the world by sinking deeper and deeper and deeper into the quicksand of Gaza. And I wrote a couple of weeks ago that I thank Presidents Biden and Trump for giving us so much leeway. They gave us enough rope that we can really hang ourselves, both of them together. And that's what's happened more than anything else. Anybody else? Harvey had all these questions before we went live, so you want to come back and ask your questions so everyone can hear it and we can record it for posterity?
Well, what is predominantly on my mind is the dramatic shift in attitude, and Israel is as good a focal point as any. I'm 81. I grew up in a traditional Sunday school, Hebrew school environment. We helped to plant trees in Israel. The whole thing. It was an ethic, it was an understanding, it was watching Israel drain the swamps and so forth and create farmlands. That's not the generation of my children, or in the case of my friends, their grandchildren. It is a very different attitude towards Israel, and I think it's reflective, in addition, with regard to how our kids see their own Jewishness, Jewish experience, relationship to a culture and a heritage. And I think at this moment in time, it's manifesting itself in terms of their attitudes towards Israel. So if you've got any comments on that, and ultimately financial support of Israel, which currently is losing between 10 to 20% of its economic base as a function of tourism loss.
Right. Well, tourism is not all that important economically to Israel. It represents, I think, 5% of the GNP. But we'll leave that part aside. It's nice to see tourists. It's sad not to, and if you're in the tourist business, you're in real trouble these last quite a number of years. But leave that part aside. Look, it's a complicated issue. There was some discussion recently about the fact that one of the problems has been that um, maybe the education we gave to our kids about Israel was too honey, and Israel was this perfect place. And then they grew up and got to college and found out there were bad things as well. Maybe that's part of the problem, and that we've been too, we haven't shown the real Israel. Maybe, maybe that's part of the problem. Part of the problem, of course, is that, you know, the parents, the generation that they grew up in, we've moved further and further from the Holocaust. And by the way, Holocaust education is another problem, but we'll put that aside for 2 seconds. But we've moved further and further from the time when Israel was this heroic state. Um, how many of you people on this podcast didn't see Exodus more than once or twice when you're youth? Right? Exodus, the heroic Israelis creating a state against all odds, all those sort of things. They were great. It was a great story. It was a mostly true story. Yeah, there were some, mistakes and etc., but it was mostly a true story. But since 67, we've been an occupying country. We've been a country that occupies other people. And there's no easy way around it. No, it's my problem, leaving aside everything I said today, is that I think the occupation has been a terrible thing for Israel because you can't be a good occupier. There's no such thing. Over a period of time, you eventually become something else. You psychologically begin to think the people you occupy that they're not equal to you. It's just the way it is. It's not because you don't occupy them because you think they're unequal. But once you start occupying, wait a second, I'm occupying, they can't be, as good as me, etc. There's a level of violence that takes place in an occupation that has come back into Israeli society. I think the occupation is a terrible thing for Israel. I don't care about the Palestinians, but for Israelis, it's a terrible thing. On the other hand, I don't know how we end it, to be quite honest with you. I have no idea. Gaza, I know how we can end it because there's a clear border. And quite frankly, as much as the terrible things that happened on October 7th, they will never happen again because anyone who gets within, I don't know, half a kilometer of the border will be mowed down automatically by drones that'll be above them, and there'll be no chance whatsoever to get anywhere close to the border ever again. That's my opinion. And rockets, well, guess what? Even now, we knock down 98% of the rockets that come from Gaza. Once the lasers get deployed, we'll knock down 99.9% of them. So they're not going to be a threat. So I don't really care what happens in Gaza so much. But the West Bank is much more problematic. You have Arab villages within 3 kilometers of Ben Gurion Airport. That's problematic. So you can't just pull out. You can't just leave it. And we haven't been able to make peace with them because that's a whole other story. So it's a bad scene. It's a bad scene for young people. We're an occupier. Occupiers are always bad. Not to mention, um, in the whole um, sense of the left over the last 20, 30 years, is the weak have to be right. It's not a question of who's right, it's a question of who's weak. And clearly the Palestinians are the weak party in our conflict. So they naturally tend to go with the Palestinians. And then, of course, as we've seen, the leftist views on Israel and Palestine, they become one and the same. I mean, there's nothing more absurd than Queers for Palestine, right? I mean, that's one of the more absurd things that exist. But it doesn't seem to bother anybody. Um, the fact that Tel Aviv is the most friendly place for people who are not straight sexually, doesn't seem to, too bad. We support Palestine. Okay. So it's complicated. It's not easy, but it's very troubling. You're absolutely right. It's very troubling because there's not a base of people who are coming up to support Israel. Birthright had some positive impacts. It clearly had positive impacts. The people who return from birthright trips tend to be more involved with Israel, care more about Israel. We don't know what the long-term impacts have been, but it's had its impact, but it's limited. It's limited to, I think, 5,000 a year these days, maybe a little bit less. I'm not sure what the cohort of Jewish youth is every year. With 6 million, it's probably somewhere in the area of 80,000 or 90,000. This is a rough demographic guess on my part. Someone else here might be able to figure that out. So we're only getting a small percentage of Jewish youth on birthright. So we're failing. Yes, we're failing. And I think look back at all the work I tried to do years ago for Israel and the States and everything else, 50 years later, and we're worse off than we were 50 years ago. Some of it's Israel's fault, but some of it's American Jewry's fault. Yochi. Yochi Werner?
Is that me?
That's
Claude has his hand up.
There's a bunch of questions in the chat.
Am I
Okay,
Yossi?
no, there's Yochi Werner raised their hand.
Oh,
You're not Yochi, I'll call on you afterwards. We have a Yochi Werner somewheres?
Yeah, there's a bunch of questions in the chat.
Okay, well, okay. Um, Claude, you have a question?
Elections. For those of us that want to spend a lot of money in Israel to get rid of the current government, when can the elections come and what can we do? I have about 25 people that have their checkbooks ready to write.
Okay, so I don't know when they're going to be elections. He'll do everything he can to delay them. If he doesn't get a deal with the ultra-Orthodox for the draft, when the Knesset meets again at the end of the holidays, there's talk about the fact the government will fall, which means there'll be elections in early next year. Who to support? I can't give you that answer right now.
No, not the who to support, how to get there. So the question is, so you're saying if the Haredi, oh shush, if you're saying if the sorry, that was my phone. If you're saying that the Haredi could take the government down, so how do we seed that angst among them? Where do we go to make that happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. First
I'm
of all,
serious.
no, I'm serious. First of all, you make sure that everyone you know does not give money to any Haredi cause. Period. Because money is fungible, as you know, and even if you give it to a Haredi cause here, it can end up in Israel. So that's number one. Turn off the spigots. That's number one. Because when the spigots get turned off, it has that impact. So that's the first thing I would do. That's the one thing you can do. No more money to any Haredi groups in the United States, in Israel, anywhere else. And that probably includes Chabad. Chabad is a right-wing organization here in Israel, but we'll leave that aside. They do some positive things in America, obviously. But that's the one thing that one can do. What else one can do, I don't really know in terms of to get the Haredis to leave the government. I don't know. That's the rabbis decide ultimately. A bunch of 90-year-old rabbis make all the decisions for them.
Which organizations in America are Haredi when you say that? I didn't know there was such an organization.
There are
As an
plenty of
example.
yeshivas and all these other stuff.
Oh,
All the requests you get all the time in the mail, they're all Haredi.
oh. No, we don't get mail anymore. So,
Okay, well, the emails you get, whatever it is, they're all
right.
Haredi. Chabad is Haredi. Um, we can go into I'm sure there are a bunch of others. I haven't followed the American scene as closely, but they clearly are. And you got to
Okay.
look carefully.
Okay. So beyond that, in the fall, then where do we go if we have to wait till the spring?
Look, we need to. I don't have an answer for you right now. I also need
Okay.
to check the legal issues,
Okay.
which because there's a limitation of what they can make sure that somehow the right wing can fund. You can fund the right wing, but you can't fund the left wing in Israel at the moment. They're trying to do that as much as possible. So um, let me find out. I'll get back to you
No, no
directly.
issue.
That's whatever. Okay. Anyone else? And they said there's some questions in the chat. Okay. What is the population as if the whole thing is going on? Okay, the majority of the population is not happy. The majority of the population wants this war to end. The majority of the population is in favor of ending the war to get back the hostages, period. If you look at any opinion poll, this current government will not have a majority after the elections. I don't know you know, um, what Netanyahu will try to pull off to make sure he tries to win, but as of right now, there is no poll that shows him with a majority of electorates. The fact of the matter is the insanity. He keeps on saying, "Democracy, democracy." I was elected. Well, first of all, Netanyahu was never elected directly. He ended up with the most votes in the parliament. But in any parliamentary election, a parliamentary system, the head of a government would have resigned after October 7th. This is the only place that the heads of the government doesn't resign and holds on, as tight as can be. So the population wants him gone. But that doesn't matter because until there's an election, we can't get rid of him. And that's the reality, I'm afraid. And the Israeli system is such that the party members are completely tied to the party leader and they can't act on their own. There's no such thing as rebels in the parties in Israel because none of them get elected directly. They all get appointed or elected by the central committee of the party. So you can't have someone who comes from a particular part of Israel and he got elected you can't have a congressman who will go against his party leaders like it used to be. In the States, of course, it's much less at the moment. Um, okay. I said what the suggestions are. Don't forget Trump's dream of Gaza resorts. No one believes there's going to be resorts in Gaza. I mean, what are we talking about, really? Um, I mean, it has nice beaches, but so does Tel Aviv. I just don't see it happening. And again, where the Gazans going to go? Where are the Gazans going to go? They're not going to disappear. As much as we'd wish they would disappear, they're not going to disappear. And even if, people making the mistake, well, maybe some of them will leave. Okay, so with the 2 million Gazans, let's say 500,000 of them leave. That still leaves 1.5 million. Well, guess what? In 67, there were like 200,000 of them. Today, there are 2 million, there are 2.5 million of them. They multiply quickly. They have one of the highest birth rates of anyone in the world. Now, that's a whole question why you'd want to have such a high birth rate in this situation, but that's something else. But they have a high birth rate. It won't matter if we get rid of a certain percentage of them because there'll be more. And so I don't see any solution that way. Anyone else?
I just
Last,
want to
got it.
clarify, Mark, about birthright because I was involved in 1999 with Richard Joel, et cetera, that the numbers are probably 20,000 from last year and maybe 25,000 this year, and probably 70% of the youth that come under the age of 30 are coming from the birthright program, not 5,000. I don't know where that number came from that you
I mean,
had.
what number did you just give? Birthright. I thought birth rate.
Birthright. Birthright. I'm sorry, I didn't speak clearly. Probably
What?
15 to 20 to 25,000 the last year or two, and 75% of youth under the age of 30 come to Israel through the birthright program.
Well, then it's a failure, I guess, in the sense if we're not succeeding with if we're not having the impact we thought we were having with it.
That's a
Uh,
failure, 15
well,
to 20,
no,
25,000.
if we're not, it's a success in terms of who we're getting here, the numbers. But the question is it succeeding in achieving what we're trying to achieve, right? In other words, what Harvey brought up before, the concern that the young people are less tied to Israel, anti-Israel, less tied to the Judaism. The idea of birthright was to try to solve that problem, right? To some extent, to ameliorate the problem. And so maybe it hasn't. I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer. Maybe it'd be obviously much worse without birthright. I mean, I haven't seen any birthright kids not come back enthusiastic about it. Well, some small percentage. Most of them come back enthusiastic about Israel. But does it last? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that's the question. We don't really know. Okay, last call. So I guess we'll reconvene in 2 weeks. Please keep on giving some feedback. And people, if I ask you in another couple of days to please check out my game, I'd really appreciate it. I need to find some kids, grandkids or something to play it because I need feedback to go forward. So I'd appreciate that. So
Where do we
anyway,
find it?
it's a Lincoln. I'll put the link in tonight again.
Okay.
It's not on sale. It's just it's a beta that's
You
available.
said Lincoln?
A link. I'll put a link to
Oh, a
the
link. Oh,
a
okay.
link.
Because I thought you were quoting Abraham Lincoln
No,
about
no, no. One of my other games.
the terror is from within, not
Yes,
from those from without.
absolutely.
For you, for us and for you.
Yeah. Okay, everybody. So thank you all. Have a
Thank you,
good
Mark.
2 weeks.
Bye,
And
Stacy.
well, one of these weeks we'll have
Bye-bye.
good news.
Thank you.
Oh,
Shana Tova to
Not
those
to
who
everybody
observe.
else,
and
right?
Sandra.
Yep.